Today I'll talk about how Ravana died and how when I became enlightened, I actually witnessed that period of time and witnessed the death of Ravana. So at that time, there was a war between Ravana and his kingdom and many other kingdoms in the world. One of these kingdoms was the one that existed in Egypt, and the pyramids had already been built at that time, the Great Pyramid. So Ravana was extremely powerful, and he had technology beyond others. Um, so these kingdoms that were at war with Ravana banded together, if you will, and they made a peace offering, capitulation, if you will, where they announced to Ravana that they would basically surrender. As part of that surrender, what they did is they took the top of the Great Pyramid and carried it in a chariot all the way to the kingdom of Ravana. And they basically offered that as a sign of their surrender, the top of the Great Pyramid, the capstone, if you will. Now, during Enlightenment, I witnessed actually being an elder of one of these peoples that was at war with Ravana. And during the night before the presentation of that top of that Great Pyramid to Ravana, with my apprentice as an elder of that people, we forged earrings out of glue in the caves, and basically prepared for the next day and prepared basically for the possibility that we would die. Because that capitulation or that surrender to Ravana was actually a plan to get him in one place and to basically attempt to attack him. So the next day, we basically met in that cave and hid behind a rock in that cave. And in that cave, in the middle of the cave on the floor, the top of the Great Pyramid was there. So what ended up happening is that Ravana entered that cave and basically went to gloat, if you will, over the top of the Great Pyramid. And what happened at that time is through the openings, one of the openings of the cave, elders from and warriors, if you will, from all the different other people that were at war with Ravana rushed into the cave. One of them, I'll always remember her, was a woman, very fierce, almost with paints, if you will, or clothes, almost like a white tiger. And they all rushed Ravana at one time. And before doing that, what had happened is that cave had actually been modified. So, in preparation for this showdown with Ravana, if you will, a hole had been built into the cave, into the bottom of the cave, connected to a water source. So when Ravana entered the cave, the plug, if you will, on that water tunnel, if you will, had been opened up, and water started rushing into that cave. There was a reason behind that, and the reasoning here is that the goal of the people who fought with Ravana, and it wasn't just one person, it was all these elders and top warriors, if you will, of all these different peoples, was to, first of all, imprison Ravana, but also with the knowledge that the soul lives on, if you will, after death. It was to kill Ravana, but also to imprison his soul. So what they had done is when they had prepared this cave for this confrontation with Ravana, they had actually inscribed a seal, if you will, on the bottom of the cave, that basically culminated at the top of the Great Pyramid, which was used as a focusing point. And what happened is when Ravana stepped into this area, He was basically immobilized there through the water that was falling down, that was filling up, started filling up the cave, and basically from there, his soul was captured. And then what happened is, um, when he was rushed, if you will, by all of these different people, all these different elders from the different nations, if you will, he actually had a handheld device which projected fire. So what he did is he immediately burnt all of them to a cinder. But however, the elder that had toiled with his apprentice in that cave basically hid behind a rock and was not burnt. So at that time, all the other elders and warriors, if you will, had already been burnt to a cinder by this device of Ravana, who in basically one sweep destroyed all his attackers. But then the elder that did survive rushed Ravana. The water was already covering his ankles, and basically used a knife and stabbed him into the thigh. And stabbed him in the thigh. Sorry, in the hip, and Ravana at that time killed that elder as well. But what happened there is that Ravana ended up dying of his wounds as he was immobilized in that cave. And because he was within that seal, his soul was projected on the wall of the cave where it was sealed away. So when Ravana's body died, his soul stayed sealed within the stone and was not free to move on. So this leaves a situation where in this cave you have the body of the elder, you have the body of Ravana, you have the other elders and warriors who were burned. And what happened is, in this cave of death, if you will, where the soul of Ravana was imprisoned, if you will, or sealed onto that wall, you have a hunter that came in one day after that, and he was actually hunting for Ravana as well. He basically came into that cave, and he came onto the scene where Ravana was dead, where his body was dead. And at that time, it was basically the water level had risen up and was now a little lake within this cave, if you will. But you could still, there were still stones above that lake where you could still enter the cave. Basically the lake covered the tip of the Great Pyramid. Not a very big lake, just basically a water lake covering the bottom of the cave. And he stumbled this, and he realized, well, Ravana is dead. Ravana has been defeated. So this hunter is the hunter that later was called Rama, right? So what happened is this hunter left the cave, went to his village where he lived, and told his best friend that Ravana was dead. So what happened at that point is that his best friend, who happened to be a minstrel or a bard, if you will, developed a story with songs, a story that he told to everyone about how his friend Rama had killed Ravana, right? Because he's the one who had reported on his death. So what happened is, as stories are told verbally, it's the telephone game, if you will, where stories get distorted over time as they're told and retold from one person to the next. And the story basically evolved into the story that we now have about how Ravana was defeated and how Ravana died. When in essence, he died in that cave, basically by deceit, if you will, as he was brought there and rushed by all those elders. If it wasn't for that one last elder who snuck up to him basically after all the other ones had been killed as well and stabbed him in the hip, Ravana would have survived. So what's very interesting here also is that Ravana's soul was actually imprisoned within that cave, imprisoned in the stone. And if you see that cave now, you can actually see what is almost like the imprint of his face on the side of that wall of that cave, and the top of the Great Pyramid, which serves as a focusing point for that seal that was used to seal up his soul. So that's the story of Ravana and how he was really defeated, if you will. The story of the technology he had, the handheld device that was just in the palm of his hand that blew out fire, and how he basically ended up killing the elders of all these nations, which basically led to a huge amount of loss of knowledge as well for all these different people, as they lost their elders as well, who were killed by Ravana at that time. It's the story of how Rama ended up walking into this scene in this cave, went back to his village, and told his best friend the story of basically that Ravana had been defeated, and then how his friend basically out of there created a grand story about how Rama had defeated Ravana. So that's the story of Ravana, the story of Rama, and how that story was told from one person to the next, and embellished and embellished, and how it became into the story that is now told. Through time, stories change, and it's difficult to get the original details of what really happened. That's it for that story. Thank you very much for listening.